All right. Gaza War Day 390, Lebanon War Day 44. No end in sight. Important to say no end in sight today because there's a lot of ceasefire smoke being blown in many directions, especially in the Lebanon fight. People are reading like Naim Qassem, Sheikh Naim Qassem, the new former Deputy Secretary-General, new Secretary-General of Hezbollah. They're trying to read his speech like it was tea leaves. He said it obviously, very obviously and clearly that the fronts will not be separated and that a ceasefire in Lebanon can only be had through a ceasefire in Gaza. And yet people are saying, oh, but he hinted at this and that. He didn't hint anything. He said the policy that Hezbollah has had for a year and more, which is that Lebanon and Gaza either have a ceasefire for both or the war continues. Hamas has made many statements where they say we will accept a ceasefire if it meets our four demands: prisoner exchange, end to the war, permanent end to the war, with full withdrawal, and an end to the siege. I believe those are the four. If I missed any, let me know. The A couple of important quotes. There's someone who tweets as Eyes on South One is the Twitter account. And he said something like every time there's an uptick in talk of cease, he said, no, he didn't. That's not late. That wasn't him. Eyes on South said there's absolutely nothing to indicate a ceasefire. Don't, if you want clout, find post kittens or something. He made some kind of quip. And I think that's completely right. There is no end in sight. And it's foolish to believe noise coming from the United States about a ceasefire, about they everybody wants a ceasefire on their terms, right? Israel would accept a ceasefire if they could keep firing, and the other side would cease firing. What do they care? But that's not a ceasefire because for a ceasefire to happen, both sides have to agree. And Israel is not ready to agree to a ceasefire that involves them ceasing firing. So, of course, they're trying to impose their terms at the table through politics and through the destruction of civilian lives. Those are their three places where they try to impose their will. But there's no reason to believe that there is any kind of ceasefire or negotiation that's on the horizon. And Laith Marouf, who's been on this channel a couple of times, and he's Free Palestine TV on YouTube, they said on Twitter, the Free Palestine TV account said something like every time there's a uptick in talk of ceasefire, there's some major depraved attack on civilians that's going to follow. So really the time to watch out for something really awful is when you hear more talk of a ceasefire, more promises of a ceasefire from the US. And the United Nations, I mean, my God, what is the United Nations? What is the point of the United Nations? The displays of uselessness and then worse than uselessness that are going on. The Israelis are trying to kill United Nations soldiers in Lebanon. They've killed many, many United Nations workers for UNRWA. They've banned UNRWA. They are so contemptuous of the United Nations, all of its bureaucracies, and all of the countries of the world that gather there. The Security Council has passed a ceasefire resolution sometime in the mists of time many months ago. The ICJ has ruled that Israel's supposed to stop. Sleeping Beauty from the International Criminal Court says there's warrants. Just the utter uselessness of this institution. And I really believe that its main function right now is to keep everybody there talking and feeling like something is going to change so that the United States can continue to commit this genocide right out in the open while people are waiting for Lucy to hold the football for them. And the United Nations is the ultimate for this. On the home front, though, in terms of Israel, my favorite prophet of doom, Yitzhak Brick, well, he's my second favorite. My favorite prophet of doom is Ori Goldberg, but my second favorite prophet of doom, Yitzhak Brick, who's a retired general, he has come out with another interview talking about the um, he was talking about the imminent collapse of Israel again. And Israel's apparently going to collapse. And let me just try to find it. Yes, sorry, it took me a minute to find it. It was Yitzhak Brick. It's in Ma'ariv, an Israeli paper, I guess. There's a Ma'ariv podcast. And here's the article. Why don't we take a look at the latest from our second favorite prophet of doom? Yitzhak Brick reveals the fateful decision made by the chief of staff 2 hours before the massacre. In an interview with Doron Cohen on the Maariv podcast, the prophet of rage of the security establishment reveals most of the reports about the tunnel destruction of the tunnels are lies. The reduced IDF is not able to hold territory for long. Netanyahu is a prisoner in the hands of Smotrich and Ben Gvir. He's considered the prophet of rage. The country is in the process of collapsing. The economy is collapsing. Society is collapsing. We have a problem with the world that we are losing it. Telling the public that the tunnels are being destroyed is a big lie. They're lying to the public. We destroyed maybe a few percent. Hamas is in the tunnels, almost all of them. They live in tunnels with air conditioners, fuel, everything. I don't know. He knows this. They collected food for a year or two. He's just making stuff up. Uh, you don't have the power to replace. You cannot detain a person who occupied Gaza more than a few months because he must be replaced. Disturbing failures on October 7th. Northern Front. The army today enters the place as far as the Litani, only 3 kilometers. Why? Because this army is tiny. In 1978, it reached Litani, and in 82, it reached Beirut. Only 3 kilometers. He argues there's a problem with the selection of commanders. Iran has the ability to build nuclear bombs without having anything to do with facilities. The war is against the axis of evil, Russia, China, and Iran. Good luck fighting. Yitzhak Barik is delusional in his own way, isn't he? Smotrich and Gavir are telling him we need to reach a political. Okay, so what does Brick want? The prime minister should be focused on a defense alliance that will provide resources to the IDF. Oh, I wonder who's going to be in this alliance. Maybe the whole West that is unconditionally providing resources to the IDF. We need to reach a political understanding that Hezbollah will be beyond the Litani, and if it crosses the Litani, we will attack and not wait as we've been waiting years now. Oh, okay. So we're gonna push them back to the Litani, and we're going to um, attack them if they cross the Litani. That's the big plan by this unusually perceptive general. The public lives on the Titanic, rejoices at every small success, but doesn't understand what's going on. You see it all along. The destruction of the first house, that's how it happened to us in the Holocaust. It happened to us in the Gaza envelope. Okay. Okay, buddy. That's enough of that. So Yitzhak Brick, the prophet of doom, he says a bunch of stuff that has no real backing, but he is pessimistic overall. What he wants to do would be no better. So in a sense, you could read Yitzhak Brick as a real sign of the hopelessness because even the people that are saying this isn't working have no idea what would work. He proposes pushing Hezbollah back to the Litani River. And he himself is saying we can't even advance 3 kilometers. And 3 kilometers is very generous in terms of where they are, where the Israelis are. Bernie Sanders has exhorted you to vote for Kamala Harris because the genocide isn't the only issue. And there are other issues which the Democrats will also not do anything about. Why would they do anything about anything? Why do you think they care about anything if they don't care about this? There's this kind of idea that, well, okay, even if they don't stop the genocide, they'll be good on some other things. Why do you think that? Why would you think that a party that doesn't do anything about genocide will then do things that are good on any other file? It doesn't. Anyway, Bernie Sanders is not your friend. Um, and Mohammed Al-Kurd, I've been talking on this channel on EI last week a lot about psychological collapse of Israel and the impossibility of maintaining balance, normalcy, sanity while committing these atrocities, while so many people are committing so many atrocities in such an open and documented way. And Mohammed Al-Kurd, who's a poet and writer, he's the kid whose house was stolen many years ago now by this settler, and there's all this documentation from that from Sheikh Jarrah years ago. People maybe remember the settler saying the famous, that hideous settler saying, if I don't steal it, someone else will. You guys probably remember that. The most Israeli quote ever. And he was saying this to one of Muhammad al-Kurd's family members, I think his sister. And so Muhammad al-Kurd is a great speaker and poet and writer. And so he's also very active on Twitter and social media. And he said these soldiers are being, the Israelis are being punished by their own brains in lieu of being punished by the International Criminal Court. And that's, I think that's a very, very pertinent way of looking at it. Okay, now to the fighting, to the fronts. On the on the Gaza front, you hopefully saw John Elmer's report in on the Electronic Intifada live stream today. He showed videos of all kinds of ambushes and attacks with especially the Shoath device. I think he said that was the main character of his report today. The Shoath device is a heavy explosive device that sits on the ground, and then it's let off at a close distance from the tank that you're trying to blow up or the bulldozer that you're trying to blow up. And they had incredible success. And Scott Ritter, who I also have been listening to a lot on different channels, he's on a lot of different channels. He was on this channel once. He used that kind of infantry terminology. He said, Qassam brigades are closing with and destroying the Israeli military in Gaza. And that's exactly right. I mean, infantry operations are like this, right? The point of infantry is to get close and destroy the enemy from close. And that is how Qassam fights, and that is how Hezbollah has been fighting. They describe in their own reports, they call it zero distance, clashing from zero distance. And those zero distance clashes are the kind of clashes that the guerrilla resistance wants. The resistance wants to be at zero distance. The Israelis want to be at infinite distance. They want to be killing people by remote control. And that's why they do their best to kill civilians, defenseless people by remote control. So all over Gaza, especially though in the north. So in the north around Jabalia, where the intense genocide is happening, where the Israelis are surrounding hospitals, attacking hospitals, imposing starvation, just slaughter, field executions, every genocidal horror that you can imagine they're doing in a concentrated way in Jabalia. They've killed 1,200 people, 35 or 40 today up there. They are really conducting the most intense of their intense genocidal campaign in Jabalia right now. And at the same time, groups of 3 and 4 are being killed in unbelievable, dramatic ambushes by the resistance. So, same story as Gaza, but in an intensified way. Same story as Gaza has had all year long, but in this incredibly intense way. In the West Bank, there's fighting in Tubas, in Tulkarm, Nur al-Sham's camp, which is beside Tulkarm, and improvised explosive devices, machine gun fire, small arms clashes with the Israelis who are invading the camp, confronting the invasion. The field reports that you see of these they always start with confronting the enemy invasion. Don't sleep on the Iraq front. The Iraq front is launching drones to Golan, Haifa. US occupied Syria is being hit. The gas fields that they're occupying are being hit by drones, presumably from the Iraqi resistance. Yemen has hit some more ships. They reported hitting I think, two more ships that are trying to run the Red Sea blockade they've imposed. I read a report on Egypt. Oh my God. Egypt helped an Israeli ship flying a German flag of convenience, full of weaponry, full of explosives, ordnance intended for dropping on Gaza. And the Egyptians helped that ship dock at Alexandria after lots of other ports it refused to let it dock. And now it's docked in Egypt. The depravity of the Egyptian government. There was a report also, I think somebody quoted from Bob Woodward's book, apparently. Bob Woodward has a new book. Bob Woodward being the American journalist who I think broke the Watergate story. I think a lot of us remember Watergate. I was too young for Watergate, but I know some of you are old enough to remember Watergate. And I'm sure some of you have heard the name, but don't know about the President Nixon listening on his political enemies at the water and sending the FBI to raid the Watergate Hotel and getting caught doing it, and that being a big scandal that made him resign. And that being like Watergate. So you add something gate to any scandal now. And it's because of the Watergate scandal. So Bob Woodward wrote a book about this war, apparently. And he said the president of Egypt, Sisi, expressed that the only thing he wanted was to maintain peace with Israel through this whole conflict. And mission accomplished, President Sisi. Congratulations. So the U.S. anyway, the U.S. is also bombing Hodeidah again. So that's the port in Yemen. They bombed the university. So following the U.S.-Israeli emphasis on important military targets, they bombed Hodeidah University. Nice going, guys. Okay, now Lebanon, there's many things to talk about with Lebanon. You guys remember Netanyahu giving a televised address when he first started this genocidal aerial campaign and now the ground campaign against Lebanon, where he said, please start a civil war for us. Lebanon stubbornly for some reason, didn't think that starting a civil war on behalf of the people who are bombing and invading your country was a great thing. So they decided not to do that this time. And now the American ambassador has gone and said, we're going to need you to go ahead and start a civil war on our behalf because we can't just kill everybody ourselves. We need you to do some of the killing for us. That's generally how we do things. The Americans do things. They look for locals to do their killing for them. The Israelis just use the American weapons to do the killing for them. So the US also made this appeal to try to get Lebanese to start a civil war among themselves. The weird thing about this, I think I've said this before, I've definitely thought this all along. If you know a little bit about the history of Lebanon, like say you've read David Hurst's book, Beware of Small States, or something, any history of Lebanon, recent history of Lebanon, You know that the reason Hezbollah exists in the form that it exists, which is as this state within a state, this army, this independent armed wing with a political party and a whole social infrastructure and being the kind of hegemonic party of the people of the South and of the Shia of southern Lebanon, with great links to all the other communities of Lebanon, especially South Lebanon. And the reason it exists and has this army is precisely because by US and colonial design, Lebanon is incapable of having an effective army. It's not allowed. It's incapable of having an independent economy. It's not allowed. It's incapable of protecting its sovereignty or preventing anyone from showing up and spying. And it's a spy playground. It's a financial what? It's financially open and exposed. It has no ability to protect its economy, and it has no ability. Its military is incapable of defending Lebanon. So now this Lebanon, and so it happened that when Israel invaded and occupied Lebanon and was abusing the people of Lebanon for decades, this organization arose independent of the Lebanese state to drive them out. And its capacities grew and grew, and it grew into this huge thing, and it's very powerful and organized, and it has alliances with Hamas now and with Iran, of course, and with Yemen and Syria, and it does things for them and they do things for them. It has a foreign policy, it has a military structure, and all of this arose because Lebanon could not defend Lebanon from the Israeli invader. So Hezbollah said, we will defend Lebanon from the Israeli invader. And Lebanon and Hezbollah successfully got rid of the Israelis in 2000 and then again in 2006. And in all probability, they're going to do it again, probably in calendar year 2024 or 2025, maybe. So the idea of Americans having designed the country to be penetrable, having designed the country to be pliable, having designed the military to be ineffective, is going to then say, let's 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 change the Lebanese government, and that will somehow get rid of Hezbollah. Hezbollah arose because America set up this government this way with this gigantic vacuum and inability to defend itself. You cannot regime change Hezbollah. Hezbollah is not the regime. You see the problem? Israel has another approach. Israel is trying to depopulate Lebanon and commit enough genocide to depopulate Lebanon and murder people by air to such an extent that Hezbollah has no base, right? Draining the swamp, I guess, if you want to use the anti-guerrilla counterinsurgency notion. Because Mao Zedong said that in a guerrilla war, the guerrilla fighter is like a fish and the people are the water. And so the Americans trying to apply counterinsurgency in Vietnam, they said, okay, well, if the guerrillas are the fish, then we're going to drain the swamp. We're going to drain the fish. We're going to displace, we're going to depopulate, we're going to put people in concentration camps, which is also a practice they did in the Philippines, which the British followed in the Boer War just a few years after that, and which the Americans used in Vietnam and the British used in Malaysia. So the concentration camp strategy, probably the first instance that I know of was the US and the Philippines, followed very quickly by the British in the Boer War, who put more Africans in concentration camps than white Boers, by the way, but no one cares about that, of course, in our racist context. So that's Israel's plan, is to target the entire civilian population. The American plan is to try to do a regime change at the top and try to encourage a civil war. What neither of them want to do is, for example, what the Russians have decided they want to do in Ukraine, which is go and fight the Ukrainian army in a military on military confrontation. And I'm not going to talk much about Ukraine. You know, I've held my tongue on Ukraine in general. Not my lane, as they say. But if you do watch that war, as I do, and I have to, if you're interested in military affairs, you see that it's fundamentally a conflict between militaries. And it's just like unbelievable to watch that. It's tragic, but it's an unbelievable thing that's unfolding over there in terms of the technology and the strategies and this is something that'll be studied for generations. But unlike what the Americans do and the Israelis do, it is a military on military war fundamentally. And the Americans and the Israelis want to do everything but fight their opposite numbers. They don't want to go and fight Hezbollah. So they want to try to convince the weak Lebanese army, to go and fight Hezbollah for them. You made it weak. You deliberately designed it to be weak. If it was stronger, they would probably be able to defend themselves from Israel. Hezbollah is designed to fight Israel. You're not going to be able to beat them with an army that's designed to lose to Israel. So these are not plans that are going to work. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is not the last thing, but the second last thing I want to talk about is Naim Qassem and his speech, his first speech as Secretary General. But before that, I just want to make a note of the way John Elmer said that the Shoath device, this kind of giant landmine, explosive penetrating ground-based explosive device, was the main character. I would say the main character on the Lebanon war front over the past couple of days is the ability of Hezbollah to target accurately groups of Israeli soldiers as they're gathering. So just today there were 32 operations that Hezbollah reported to us. Let me just read you, because most of them are targeting of gatherings of soldiers. At 2:30 a.m., a rocket barrage, this is number one, a rocket barrage targeted a gathering of Israeli soldiers in the Amra area south of Khiam. 3:30 a.m., a second rocket barrage targeted Israeli forces in the Amra area south of Khiam. At 3:30 a.m., a rocket barrage targeted Israeli soldiers gathered in the Yaqusa area on the outskirts of Khiam. At 4:30, a second rocket barrage targeted Israeli soldiers in Yaqusa on the outskirts of Khiam. 7:45, they're attacking Haifa with drones. Wednesday morning, an attack drone targeted Israeli soldiers gathered in the Jatun settlement. Morning of Wednesday, another drone targeted Israeli soldiers gathered in the Shtula settlement. And at 11 a.m., a rocket barrage targeted Israeli soldiers gathered in Khalat al-Asafir in Al-Khiam. 11 o'clock, rocket barrage targeted Israeli forces east of Wazani Spring. 11 o'clock, rocket barrage targeted Israeli forces in Wati Khiam, southeast of the town. 12 o'clock, second rocket barrage at Khalat al-Asafir. 12:30, A rocket barrage targeted Israeli forces gathered at the Sheba Gate. 12:45, Sheba Gate. 1:30, Wati Khiam. 1:25 p.m. now, Krayot, north of Haifa. 2:15, a rocket barrage targeted Israeli forces gathered at the Fatima Gate. 2:15, they repelled a Hermes drone using air defense. 3 o'clock, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 rocket barrages at 3 o'clock. One in Wadi As-Safir, one in Rosh Pina, one in Yesod HaMa'ala, Kidmat Tzivi, Hatzor Haglilit. And then at 3:50, a guided missile targeted a gathering of 12 Israeli soldiers between Kfar Kila and Dir Mimas, causing deaths and injuries. 4 o'clock, they repelled an Israeli warplane over Zahrani, forcing it to leave Lebanese airspace. 5 p.m., combined attack of missiles and drones on Ain Shemer base in occupied Akka, Haifa and Akka, so lots of targeting of missiles. The missile force very active. Missiles at Adam Camp, Special Units Training Camp southeast of Tel Aviv. And then from 27 through 32, rocket barrage, Wati Khiam, Liman settlement, Gesher Haziv, Kiryat Shmona. So the Israelis are trying to gather the forces to invade Lebanon with a nice big force. And if they gather that kind of force and invade Lebanon, they're going to come under a lot of fire. They're going to take a lot of casualties. But Hezbollah seems to see no reason to let them gather that force in the first place. And so it's watching these reports, it's like you're just watching the Israelis trying to assemble their forces and getting targeted as they're assembling their forces. And you might ask, why are they assembling their forces so close to the border? Why not assemble them farther back? Well, I guess they would then still get hit on the way in. That's what I remember talking to John Elmer about this months ago when they were just talking about invading Lebanon, and he said they're going to have to take back the buffer zone first, which I guess they have more or less done. And I said, why can't they just gather their forces behind the buffer zone and make a big drive to the border and beyond? I mean, it doesn't solve all their problems, but it certainly there must be some reason that I don't understand. Like maybe the distances are longer than I think, or there's not enough fuel, or some other issue, or maybe this is just where they gather, and they're coming under these rocket barrages. They're just trying to muster, and they're coming under these rocket barrages, and these rocket barrages seem to be doing some real damage, and it's it's throwing a wrench into their plan, into their invasion plan for sure. Since, I mean, I read a book, I don't remember the author or the title. Sorry, everyone. But I read a book about military strategy and history. I think it was an American author anyway. I'll try to catch I'll try to find it in my memory banks. But he said, Napoleon is thought of as, I think he said something like he's thought of as the first modern war, but he was like, Napoleon was actually the last classic war, the last classical style war, because Napoleon was all about concentrating his forces and punching through the enemy line. And he was able to, through logistical skill and other, like a really, really good command and control and really good messaging system, and a lot of the things that Napoleon just did, and really good instincts and artillery. Napoleon was good at everything, right? They say. So through all of that, Napoleon was unbeatable on the battlefield because he was able to concentrate his forces and throw them at the enemy at a weak point of the enemy and punch through the enemy line and envelop the enemy in these and there's 2 or 3 different ways to do it, right? Punch through on a flank and then you roll them up, punch through in the middle and then you roll them up, you split them, whatever. This is the ancient or the classical mode of battle. The problem after the introduction of the machine gun and just a different volume and speed of firepower is that concentrating your forces becomes impossible, right? So World War I, you have these trenches and they set up past where they can really reach each other and they're shelling each other. But like if anyone tries to go over the trench and charge the trench, the machine gun fire is just withering. And so in our last episode of World War Civ, episode 46, I don't think it's come out yet, Ludendorff's Last Gamble, it's called. We go through the way that the Germans fought in at the end of World War II. They figured out some solutions to this by not concentrating their forces. So they would go in small groups with one machine gun in a group, and they'd set up the machine gun and they'd have a firefight with the small group. And so they're not presenting a mass of men to get mown down. So this is what the Israelis were trying to do at the beginning of the war, right? They were trying to send small groups into these villages and towns, and these small groups were being absolutely monitored. They were monitored, and then they were ambushed, and they were destroyed time after time. That was the story of the first part of the war. And now it seems, and this is what I thought they were going to do next, is they're going to try to assemble a big group that you can't just ambush as a small group of guerrilla fighters and drive through and take the casualties they need to take the territory that they want to take. The problem is they're having a really hard time mustering the big group of forces in the first place. And so this is their predicament. They're throwing all the firepower they can at the problem, but it's not seemingly able to silence the Hezbollah rocket and missile force. They just can't seem to do it. And so they're going to have to try to assemble their forces under this kind of withering rocket barrage. And the rockets the Hezbollah is using. The thing about Hezbollah and Hamas is they get better over the course of the war. And their accuracy and their ability to target and their ability to kind of solve the problems that they encounter on the field gets better. So this is they're not going to run out of rockets, is what I'm saying. They're going to become more accurate over time gradually. And these rockets and drones and missiles are all going to take even more of a toll over time. So there are probably more tricks. The Israelis always have another trick. But as far as invading a country goes, you can either disperse your forces to avoid enemy firepower, or you can concentrate your forces to try to overwhelm the enemy. Those are pretty much your two options. And so what I see is them trying to oscillate between the two until they find some success that they're not having right now. And that is where they are at in terms of their Lebanon invasion. Now, I want to talk about Naim Qassem, the new Secretary-General of Hezbollah. It makes sense, right? The Deputy Secretary-General becomes the Secretary-General. They talked about Hashem Safedin. I didn't know much about him. I really only heard about him after he had already become a martyr. I knew a little bit about him, but not hardly anything. Naim Qassem, we had already seen some speeches by him, and he had said he was the one who said while Nasrallah was still alive, he made a speech where he said something like, "Watch the battlefield." You know, he talked a lot like Nasrallah did, he was out there in public too, and he had some visibility over the years himself. Also a religious scholar, and also all of those things. And his speech was really important. I thought he talked about how I thought he went a lot of lengths to dispel a lot of illusions. So he said something like, "This is not a local war. This is a war, a world war of the US and Israel to reshape the Middle East." So he was kind of quoting the new Middle East kind of thing. He said he talked about he also dispelled the idea that they were provoking Israel by starting the support front. He said that it wasn't provoking Israel, it was preemptive self-defense. That was the way he said it, like, we're next. And he was sort of like, how can you not know that you're next? How can you not know that Israel's designs also include you? And he was talking to the Arab countries, as all these leaders always do. He said he talked about some details of how Hezbollah reorganized themselves and the different layers of leadership. He said, you know, the top layer of leadership, there are still some of us left, even after all of the leaders, so many of the leaders were killed in those surprise attacks following the pager attack. He said there's a level of younger leaders below that one with experience in Syria and a lot of experience that are ready to step up. He said they're going to continue implementing the plan that Nasrallah had. He said Israel was planning on attacking the entire region through the gateway of Gaza. He said something I thought was great. He said, instead of asking us why we support Gaza, you should ask yourselves why you're not supporting Gaza. He said, we will resist and we will win. He repeated Nasrallah, a lot of Nasrallah's slogans, like the era of defeats is over, the era of victories has begun. He assured people that Hezbollah has these capabilities. He said they're ready to fight. The operations room is documenting their losses. We are causing pain. So he said, you know, this is the phase of causing pain. And he renamed the battle. He called it the Battle of the Mighty Ones. Um, he talked about how if you're betting on if you're betting on Israel to win this war, he said you'll find yourselves cursing America and its allies because they lied to you. They can't rely on time. Their losses are substantial. They'll be forced to end their aggression. And the foundation of any negotiation is a ceasefire first. And he also saluted all the martyrs. There's another statistic that he said. He said that the Israelis had violated the United Nations Resolution 1701 39,000 times in 17 years since 2006. So from 2006 to October 8th, 2023, the Israelis had 39,000 violations of United Nations Resolution 1701. So he was like, don't say that we provoked them. They were constantly violating the resolution. And he said, don't say we provided an excuse. Since when does Israel need an excuse? So those were a lot of the points that he made. So I thought that it was a very, how can I say it, brutal kind of understanding that he showed of the situation that they're in. And I thought I kind of appreciated that. That's definitely speaks to me in terms of not having any illusions about Israel and what they're facing and what Israel's trying to do here. So a couple of other kinds of questions that I feel like I should weigh in on, for what it's worth. So one of them is I want to I want to clarify that I think Israel and the US are going all out in their way right now. So I don't think they are holding back from what they are doing in Gaza. This is the full genocidal fury on display, which is why I think all of the Democratic voters who are trying to say the genocide will get worse under Trump. The assumption behind that comment is that the Democrats are somehow restraining Israel from doing the worst. They're not. They are encouraging Israel to do the worst, as will Donald Trump. So the constraint on Israel is the only constraint on Israel is the military resistance that they face. There is nothing else. There is no law. There's no shame. There is no, even their own brains. They work too slowly to create any accountability for their crimes. They may go home and kill themselves, but that's not going to save Gaza. The only thing that is saving Gaza to whatever extent there is a Gaza left is the fact that Qassam and the other Palestinian resistance are fighting, the fact that the Hezbollah opened this front, the fact that Yemen imposed this blockade, the fact that Iran and Syria are behind them, supplying them with everything that they need to do these things. That's the only constraint. That's the only constraint. You people need to understand that. People need to not put any faith in any of these other institutions that are trying to mislead you into thinking that there's going to be a ceasefire or there's going to be a United Nations intervention or there's going to be some kind of court case. I saw one analyst. I'm not going to name anybody, but I saw one analyst say that if the International Court of Justice rules that it's in fact a genocide, well, that's going to really change things. No, it's not. No, it's not. The only thing that's going to change things is the battlefield and the wearing down of the Israeli army, the grinding down of the Israeli army in terms of supplies, in terms of soldiers, in terms of equipment, and in terms of morale, and the collapse of the Israeli economy. That's it. Those are the only things that are going to stop Israel. And so this is Israel and the US unrestrained, going for broke, playing for all the marbles, as they say, and doing their worst. And their worst is absolutely horrific. And there's no reason to think it would change if Trump were elected. There is reason to think it would change if Jill Stein were elected. So, you know, Jill Stein would probably be overthrown in a coup, but I would be, I would say let's cross that bridge when we get to it, right? Um, so that's one thing I wanted to say, weigh in on. Another thing I wanted to weigh in on was Elijah Magnier, I think, said something that was true, but people were arguing with him. He said it was wise of Nasrallah to do the support front that he did and not try to like invade Israel or start an all-out attack because Israel could have then he said he understood that Western powers would quickly align with Israel, triggering a unified backlash that would devastate both Lebanon and Gaza simultaneously. By delaying, Hezbollah not only postponed inevitable early destruction, but gained time to prepare more thoroughly for the anticipated all-out war. I think that's fair. I actually think that's fair. But he also didn't delay exactly, right? The support front was like, you know, I don't want to, it was war too, but it was trying to tie up the Israelis, right? And also, let's not forget that Hezbollah spent that year destroying all of Israel's surveillance equipment on the border, all of their intelligence, all of their eyes and ears on the Lebanon border. That was starting the support front also enabled them, gave them, you want to talk about pretext, it gave Hezbollah the pretext to destroy all this equipment, which was a dagger pointed at Hezbollah for sure. It was, that was a lot of their intelligence capability. I mean, God knows how many more pager attacks and other kinds of things they could have done with the intelligence provided by all of that equipment. Now, probably the assassinations that they did do between September and October were done with intelligence from that they had collected before, right? It was older intelligence that they had. Probably. I mean, I still don't know for sure. I don't think we know for sure what happened there. But um I think Elijah Magnier makes a good point there that it was, you know, if they had if they had if they had begun this campaign right away and Israel, did their pager attack and bomb, they could have done that at any time, right? To there was nothing to stop Israel except Israel kind of understanding. Israel over the course of the year understood that all of the things that Israel had worried about over the decades, international law, Security Council, war crimes trials, boycotts, Arab countries maybe falling to revolution, all that, none of that stuff materialized. And the US restraining them as they had every single war before, none of that materialized. So it took a while for that to sink in. And when they realized they could do whatever they want, that was when they went and dropped the 80 tons of bombs on the Dahia neighborhood and dropped all these apartment blocks to kill Nasrallah and did this this absolutely depraved pager attack on that's the subject of some of the worst people in the world making some of the sickest jokes in the world. And so it was that environment of permissiveness for genocide that I don't think anybody understood this is where we would be now in 2024. And that was something maybe nobody anticipated, but we could have got there faster. Israel may have tried it then, and then, all that technical equipment would have been in place, all the surveillance, all the intelligence would have been fresher. And yeah, that would have probably happened on Israel's timing um, instead of Hezbollah's timing. Now, was um, was it inevitable? Yeah, I think it was inevitable. I think all of this was inevitable. I think Israel was always going to do this. I've said that many times. I don't think Hamas provoked this genocide. I think Israel is was this was Israel's trajectory, and Israel was going to do this genocide when they thought they had what they needed. They probably didn't know how genocidal the Democrats were going to be, how genocidal Biden was going to prove, how ineffective opposition in the West was going to be. All of these things were up in the air up until then. And now, last thing I should weigh in on is I watched Scott Ritter and Andrei Martyanov on Nima's show, I think it was. Maybe it was Nima's, maybe it was Garland Nixon, but it was one of these shows, and they were talking about they don't think Iran is going to hit Israel back. And I want to say right now that Iran is going to hit Israel back. Um, and they were saying that Iran doesn't have to because Israel's attack was ineffective. Well, I don't think that's how it works. If Israel's attack was ineffective, Israel's going to try again. Israel wants to. dominate everybody. And Israel, above all, wants Iran put in its place, whatever place Israel fantasizes Iran should be in. So Iran has to hit them back, and Iran will hit them back. And the question is, I think, how hard Iran will hit them back, and whether that will change the outcome of the any of the ongoing fronts of this war, and or whether it'll just be like now Iran's going to hit them back, and then Israel's going to hit them back, and Iran's going to hit them back harder, and it's going to kind of go like that while this war goes on the other fronts. Maybe that's how it'll go. I don't know. But some of the things that I did see, like I think you guys might have seen Alistair Crook's interview on Judge Napolitano, but that was something else. Alistair Crook said that his sources told him that the Israelis were happily flying through Jordan and Iraq, and then suddenly they phoned home, they communicated back home to say that they had encountered some kind of air defense that they had never encountered before. And then they, kind of launched their missiles earlier than they wanted to and turned around and went home. So it could be Russia, could be Iran's own systems that were better than they think. But I don't think proving that you can defend, you have a great air defense against Israel is enough to, everybody wants this war to come to a close. And I think the axis of resistance is getting that nobody else is going to bring this war to a close. And it's going to take a lot to convince this society, which has gone completely psychotic, to stop. And so I don't know. These are the kinds of calculations that Iran has to make. And likewise, you know, no, Hezbollah, I don't think Hezbollah is trying to avert an Israeli invasion in the sense that an invasion would absolutely bring many more Israeli military assets into range of zero distance attacks and tank killer missiles and all of the other things that Hezbollah has prepared. They just, why give it away if Israel can't take it? So there's no reason not to destroy their forces while they're mustering and when they try to infiltrate. But if they do manage to overcome this problem and enter in a big way, then they will encounter much bigger losses than they've encountered. All of which is just my way of preparing the comment that that kind of battle is what Hezbollah wants. What Hezbollah doesn't want is the kind of bombing that Israel is doing in Lebanon, I mean, in Beirut and all these civilians. That's what Hezbollah would want to avoid. Same with Hamas, right? Hamas would love to fight the Israeli army in the urban setting, depopulated from people. They would love to fight them in the rubble. They'd love to fight them in the tunnels if the Israelis wanted to go into the tunnels. But they're not, but that's not what Israel does, right? Israel goes and kills the civilians in Lebanon and in Gaza. They go and attack the hospitals. They go and attack the schools. They bomb the schools. They bomb the camps. They bomb the tents. That's what Israel does. So the thing that what I'm trying to say is that Hezbollah is not restraining themselves because they're worried that if they don't, Israel's going to invade. Israel is trying to invade. If Israel could be restrained through some kind of mutual agreement not to commit war crimes, I'm sure that Hezbollah would go for that, and so would Hamas. But that's not on the table. So these are just some illusions that I've seen kind of percolating around in terms of deterrence, timing, errors, like who's making errors, and I don't I just wanted to put my own 2 cents in to dispel some of these, I think, incorrect assessments. I think I will stop there, and I will leave you on that note. There will be much more to talk about in the coming days. Like I said, I saw some kind of statement today that Iran said they're going to attack the day before the U.S. election. I don't know whether that's. I can't. I doubt it. I doubt that they would announce the exact day they're going to attack 2 weeks in advance or a week and a half in advance. But who knows? I guess it's not a week and a half in advance anymore, eh? It's actually less than a week. Still, I would be surprised that they would announce the exact day. Maybe they will. Maybe they did. Maybe they just did. Anyway, should that happen or any other thing happen, you will see me again and we will talk. And until then, hang in there. I'll see you in the next one.